Social media is destroying your happiness. It's deteriorating your mental health and happiness every time you use it. Dopamine is responsible for this. In this video, I'm going to tell you how social media is destroying your mental health and happiness. I'm going to break down exactly how social media is destroying you. Let's start with dopamine. Let's start by understanding exactly how dopamine works, because that is the exact reason you're addicted to social media. It's dopamine, this chemical in our brain, responsible for making us feel pleasure. And there's always a certain amount of this molecule that's circulating throughout our body. And this is known as a tonic release of dopamine. This amount of dopamine is circulating throughout our body 24/7. The level of dopamine determines how we feel. This level of dopamine is called the baseline level of dopamine. This is the normal level of dopamine that you usually have. When we use social media and we start scrolling, we get those dopamine hits, that extra dopamine that makes us feel good, that gives us pleasure. So if our baseline is here, every time we see a reel, our dopamine goes up, comes back down, goes back up, comes back down, goes back up, and comes back down. That's how dopamine works. When you give that dopamine a peak, it's followed by a trough. After it goes up, it falls down, and it falls down below your previous baseline. You have less dopamine than before you started watching reels. So now your mind gets anxious. You want to get that level back up to baseline. So what do? You indulge in the activity again. You scroll more so that your dopamine peaks again. It goes above baseline, then it comes back down below where you were before. And when you keep doing this, you end up bringing down your level of dopamine and creating this new baseline that's far lower than the level of dopamine you had before. So you can see this continuous consumption is very destructive for your dopamine health. When we keep scrolling and when we keep watching reels, the amount of dopamine that's in our brain is too much for us to handle. When dopamine is released into our system, they attach to something called the receptors. These receptors get the dopamine, and that's how we feel that pleasure. Dopamine in our brain is not enough. Those dopamine have to attach to the receptors for us to feel the effects of it. Now, these receptors can only handle a certain amount of dopamine at a time. Can't handle the huge amount of dopamine that we release into our body every single day. When we scroll on Instagram, we get some dopamine. We watch another reel, we get more dopamine. We watch another reel, we keep getting more and more and more dopamine. And our receptors just can't handle it. They get overstimulated, and if it keeps getting overstimulated, it could die. So what your brain does is that it down regulates the receptors, which means that less dopamine can bind to the receptors. So the next time you watch a reel, even if the same amount of dopamine is released, less of it can attach to the receptors, so you feel less pleasure when you watch the next reel. And when you have down-regulated receptors, you don't feel the same pleasure in an activity that you used to enjoy. For example, if you used to love your mother's cooking, if you used to love the food that she used to make you, and then you started eating junk food, processed food, slowly you stop enjoying your mother's cooking very much, because your dopamine receptors are getting down regulated, because these processed foods release a lot of dopamine. So your dopamine receptors can't handle that much dopamine, so they get down regulated. You're not able to enjoy the home cooked meals anymore. Now, what do we mean by addiction? Addiction happens when you release so much dopamine that even the down-regulated receptors can't handle the amount of dopamine that you put into your body. Even after your receptors get down-regulated, if you introduce more and more dopamine, then most of that dopamine is going to end up attaching to those receptors. And when your brain can't down-regulate it anymore, those receptors start to die. When those receptors start to die, we develop addiction. The reason you have depression most likely is because your dopamine receptors are down-regulated. When your dopamine receptors are down-regulated, you're not able to feel pleasure in everyday activities. Dopamine is required for motivation. Dopamine, what gives you the energy to go to pursue things outside yourself. If you want to go to the gym, you need dopamine. You need dopamine to give you that motivation. Even if you are disciplined, really don't want to go to the gym, but you do it anyway, you still require dopamine. Dopamine helps in movement, and that's why when you feel depressed, you don't have that much dopamine circulating throughout your body. Your baseline is very low, so you don't even feel like getting out of bed, because that is what dopamine does to you. That's what happens when you scroll so much on Instagram, that you don't even enjoy it anymore and you do it just because of the compulsion. Because when you stop, you're going to be in that depressed state because your dopamine is just at a horrible level. We try to fix this by indulging even more, but this is just making the problem worse. The problem that was created by the social media, we're trying to cure it by indulging even more. Let's look at a seesaw. One side is pleasure and one side is pain. When you scroll on Instagram, the pleasure side gets heavier and heavier and heavier. The pain side gets lighter. And when you're done doing that pleasurable activity, when you stop scrolling, your brain will want to rebalance the seesaw. So it's going to increase the side of pain. When it increases the side of pain, it increases it by the same amount you increase the pleasure side by. So for a while, your pain will exceed your pleasure and the pain side will be heavier. That's the agitation you feel after you finish scrolling on social media to binge watching a TV show or watching a movie. It's the agitation you feel. It's the slight depression and just the pain, the discomfort of not having that baseline level of dopamine. And that pain is caused by lack of dopamine. Dopamine is stored in our body, and when we do a pleasurable activity, it's released from that store. When we don't have enough dopamine stored, we feel pain, we feel discomfort, agitation, and there's less dopamine that can circulate throughout our body. This is why social media is stealing your happiness, stealing your mental health, your mental well-being. But now we want to reverse that. We want to make your life happy again. We want to give you your happiness back. What should we do? We should use pain to get our pleasure balance up. Pleasure and pain are two sides of a coin. When there is pleasure, pain follows. And likewise, when there is pain, pleasure follows as well. So what we want to do is increase the side of pain so that pleasure will follow. When we increase pain, our dopamine levels for a short while it dips below baseline while we're doing the painful, uncomfortable activity, and afterwards it goes above baseline and stays there. So when we introduce pain, we can slowly start to bring our baseline back to normal. Now, how do we do this? What kind of activities should we do to induce pain, to create happiness and better mood? There are two things you should do. First one is cold showers. This is the most effective, most powerful, the quickest strategy that I have. Go to your shower, make it all the way cold, and step into it for 30 seconds to a minute. That's all. And when you get out, you'll instantly feel much better. This is a quick hack for your mental health. And the second one is by doing hard work, working, going to the gym, doing your homework when you really don't want to. All this creates pain, discomfort, agitation, and that's because when you do these activities, your dopamine dips below baseline and you feel that agitation. But once you're done, you'll feel that pleasure. Because remember, when the pleasure side on the seesaw becomes very heavy, the pain side compensates for that and it becomes heavier than the pleasure side. But when you make your pain side heavier than the pleasure side, then your pleasure side compensates and your pleasure side becomes heavier than your pain side. So you end up feeling happier. Your new baseline increases above the previous baseline. Now avoid stacking dopaminergic activities. Don't stack listening to music, caffeine, and going to the gym. When you stack these habits, you're creating a peak in dopamine, which will eventually lead to a trough, which will make you feel worse in the long term. If you don't like doing something, if something feels uncomfortable, be happy about it, because you know when you do this activity, you're just going to feel much better afterwards. So don't try to make an uncomfortable activity comfortable by putting music, drinking caffeine, and drinking some weird energy drink. When you stack these dopaminergic activities, you end up not feeling pleasure when you do each of them separately. So if you try going to the gym one day without music and caffeine, but all this time you've been stacking caffeine and music with your workouts, you're not going to be able to enjoy your workouts anymore, because you're just so used to having that dopamine peak that now this dopamine peak doesn't feel as pleasurable. Dopamine is relevant to recent experiences. Let's take two Instagram posts. One of them is funny and the other one is even funnier. If you see the even funnier one first and then you see the funny one second, you won't feel as much pleasure in the second one. But if you see the funny post first, you'll get that rise in dopamine, you'll feel pleasure. And if you see the second post, then you get even more pleasure. That's why recent experiences are important. So when your recent experience of going to the gym is while listening to music and drinking caffeine, your new experience now will be related to that old experience and you won't get that pleasure. Lean towards discomfort because in the long term it will make you happier and healthier. And the best way to slowly increase your mental health for your life, because right now you may be quite depressed with the amount of dopamine you're introducing into your system, with the amount of scrolling that you're doing. And the best way to improve your mental health and stop these bad habits is by having a good mental health morning routine. And I've made a video on that. Click right here.